One.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. We are beginning our Northampton Policing Review Commission meeting for December 8th. And this is being recorded by Northampton Open Media. Noah, do you mind doing roll call?
Yes.
Thank you.
Lois?
Here.
Elizabeth? Here. Booker? Here. Dan?
Here.
Nick?
Here.
David? I have to admit some people. David is not here yet. Alex?
Here.
Here somewhere. Dana?
Here.
Namdi?
Here.
Here. Michael?
Here.
Josie?
Here.
Oh, here. And Cynthia.
Here.
Okay, thank you.
Did you call me, Noah?
Oh, I did. I'm sorry.
Didn't hear it.
It's okay.
Carol. Yeah.
Oh, Carol. Hi. Here.
And I was at the last meeting. I didn't show up.
Oh, great.
24th, November 24th.
Thank you.
So we are going to begin our meeting with public comment for 30 minutes. If you are interested in participating in a public comment, you may raise your hand and you will be called on and unmuted. We will do this for 30 minutes for 3 minutes per comment. Maybe we don't have any today. Oh, Hannah Begley.
Hi. So I guess I just really wanted to share something. I did this practice yesterday. It's called pod mapping, and it's just, this is mine without police. But basically, because police come after damage is done, they don't prevent crime at all. It's just basically like, who would you call if there weren't police? And it reminded me of this one time that I was over 18 and I was on my father's property. So when he got violent, I couldn't call the police. And so I ran and I locked myself in the barn and I called my sisters. And I actually told my sisters not to come home because he was in that state. And I was just, just planning to be there. But this is more like, like I call my sisters and they would come pick me up. So that's like a way to stay safe. But yeah, these like dots here are your inner circle of people that you definitely call. And these are people that you want to strengthen bonds with. And these are organizations, these are resources, and this is networks. And then it just says community needs to take the lead. So it's just about how, if there's any peer-led programs, well, that's always community taking the lead. But if it's just the community needs to speak for itself. It was really a great exercise. Like, there, you can do these for like homework, or who would you call in a very stressful situation like that. But it's really great to think about network like that, and just strengthening our bonds with another human being. So that was it. It was really inspiring for me to do it. So yeah, that's about it. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. The next person is Henry Morgan.
Hey, can you guys hear me all right now?
Yes.
All right, solid. I'm a Northampton resident. I'm organizing with Northampton Abolition now, and a few points that I think are really important to be discussed is when it comes to budget reallocation, I don't think that just defunding is enough. What we have to do is we have to put money towards alternatives that don't criminalize behavior and reinforce the cycle of incarceration that people in poverty and marginalized individuals get. I mean, I know this is like, it sounds like beating the dead horse, but there's been so much silencing around it that peer-led programs are really important to make something that represents the community being the strategies that we use to enforce order in our community is really important. Sorry. And when it comes to when it comes to the money and the defunding, it's not enough to just take money away from the budget. We have to say where we think it should go and how we can start to create a community that isn't obsessed with state violence and centered around the continuation of the incarceration cycle. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person is Buckley.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I wanted to make a couple points towards the Policing and Practices Subcommittee. I was at your meeting, this past meeting, and I thought, your discussion and, oh, I think Cynthia can't hear me. Can everyone else hear me?
Are you close to your mic? You're a little bit low.
My computer is my mic is very broken.
Okay, no worries.
Very close. Turn my
Do
video
you mind afterwards maybe sending an email with your statement as well? You can continue because I can hear you, but there's some other folks that can't.
Okay,
So if you can also email it, that'd be great.
Yes, I'll absolutely follow up with the email. Thank you. Speaking to the Policies and Practices Subcommittee, I really enjoyed your meeting last week. I thought you dug into some very interesting stuff, and I'm very excited about the direction you've chosen to take your subcommittee. I think this is going to be very valuable and very positive. I wanted to encourage you to take on the difficult issues of traffic policing, sexual assault, and surveillance. I know you sort of discussed whether or not to do that, and I want to really encourage you to do that. And I also want to encourage you to challenge whether we ever need policing. I heard a couple comments about specific instances where someone being very, very reckless might require police and prisons. And I think that although these situations of someone driving really recklessly or being dangerous do require an emergency response, I would encourage you to also consider the possibility that there might be a better emergency response for these types of situations than police, and to challenge that. And then the last point I wanted to make is to the whole commission about the word crime. It's a really loaded term. I've heard a bunch of commissioners talk about, do we have crime? Do we have status offenses? Do we really want to use the crime here? And I want to encourage you in your preliminary proposal this coming week to be very intentional about your use of that word and to try and find more specific phrasing whenever possible. Thank you very much for all your work, and that is all.
Thank you, Ryan. Robert Eastman.
Hey everyone, I'm Robert. I live in Northampton in Ward 3, and I just wanted to summarize some important points that were made last night by Josie in the Budgets and Spending Subcommittee meeting that I agree with. He was talking about a group that we continually fail to address as people who don't call the police for their own safety. I'm just going to kind of summarize what he said. And seeing time and time again, the police are not being able to handle what's happening when there is a call. And he gave an example of when things are stolen, police can locate the stolen goods 9 to 13% of the time. So I just want to support the way that he is framing the task of the commission, which is addressing the people who don't call the police and the people who don't feel safe calling the police. And that's why the alternatives are so important. There are always going to be people who call the police because that is, they feel safe doing that. But we should actually be looking at those who aren't calling the police as a way to be accountable. And I also just wanted to support his call for a very bold cut from the police budget. I would love to see an 80% budget cut from the police department over the next couple of years. And yeah, I just hope you go big in your recommendations. So when there's pushback and compromise, we're still getting a significant cut. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Yaping Douglas.
Hello again. Thank you all so much again for everything. It's been really nice to watch some of the meetings in the last week and also read notes about them. I wanted to echo some of the things that some other folks here have pointed out. On the note of the word crime and the use of the word crime, I wanted to suggest that anytime the word crime is mentioned, that the phrase like things that are designated as crimes or things that are criminalized, there might be more precise wording than the word things, but basically describing that crime is something that's socially constructed and has been constructed to oppress people, I think is really important, because each time just people say crime on its own, it like reinforces this myth that all crimes are harmful, when in fact so many things that are designated as crimes don't actually really hurt other people, and so many things that people do in the society that do hurt other people, or that institutions do that hurt other people, are not designated as crimes. And I also wanted to comment on another phrase I've heard used sometimes, which is the phrase "the need for police," or like the phrase that "how will people still be safe?" And I wanted to suggest that we stay away from using those two different terms, because they center the perspective of the people in society that are comfortable using police and who do feel like the police make us safer. And I think the very act of using that phrase, how will we still stay safe, or like have enough police to keep people safe, basically invalidates the experiences of all the people who are made to feel unsafe by policing. And the last thing I wanted to sort of echo was the note about accountability, and that I know the commission is trying to get more testimonials from people who have been directly impacted by policing, and that I wanted to suggest that even if we don't hear more testimonials directly, that I think if the commission's recommendations can center building in accountability from here on out, so that there is always a place for the voices of people who are most directly impacted by policing to play a key role in decision making, that's super important to have that built in, as opposed to just having a space for people to speak now and then get disregarded down the road. And that also the social service organizations that the commission looks into, I hope that if those social service organizations don't have accountability built into people most impacted by policing, that that's taken into account, and that it's not recommended that resources go to additional institutions that don't value accountability. Sorry for repeating things you've heard a lot, but thank you so much again. Okay.
Thank you. Richard Hendrick.
Good evening. From time to time, I wonder if you all are not on a fool's errand, yet another commission. My reading of Jill Lepore's The History of the Riot report in June's The New Yorker did not help. There is this from that article. Maybe the most painful testimony came from Kenneth B. Clark, the African-American psychologist. I read that report of the 1919 riot in Chicago, and it is as if I were reading the report of the investigating committee of the Harlem riot of '35, the report of the investigating committee of the Harlem riot of '43, the report of the McCone Commission on the Watts riots. I must again in candor say to you members of this commission, it is a kind of Alice in Wonderland, with the same moving picture reshown over and over again, the same analysis, the same recommendations, and the same inaction. But I take solace in this from my Catholic tradition, Mother Teresa, solace in the good of doing it anyway. People are often unreasonable, illogical, and self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you are kind, people may accuse you of selfish ulterior motives. Be kind anyway. If you are successful, you will win some false friends and some true enemies. Succeed anyway. If you are honest and frank, people may cheat you. Be honest and frank anyway. What you spend years building, someone could destroy overnight. Build anyway. If you find serenity and happiness, they may be jealous. Be happy anyway. The good you do today, people often will forget tomorrow. Do good anyway. Give the world the best you have, and it may never be enough. Give the world the best you've got anyway. You see, in the final analysis, it's between you and your God. It was never between you and them anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else? Going once, going twice, 3 times. Okay, we will move on to the next bullet point on the agenda. So announcement of speakers for commission and subcommittees. That's an opportunity if we have folks that are coming to our full commission meeting or subcommittees have any speakers that they are bringing. Javier.
So just to let people know, Sean Donovan came to the Alternative Policing Subcommittee. Also, Patricia Schwartz came to talk to us. And I know that some groups have been in touch with other groups to come to the full meeting to talk. I'm sort of uncertain about those groups. Maybe somebody else have more details about it.
Yeah, so we've reached out to a number of people, including Sean, and also to some of the activists who've done either panels or been part of groups, and some of the people involved with other efforts to defund or redirect or to control police departments or the deployment of alternatives. One of those folks is Rachel Brownberg, who has agreed to speak with us. And at this point, we're looking at January 5th. So the Tuesday, that would be on a regular Tuesday, assuming we keep this rotation, to have them come speak with us, working on getting some more folks as well, just so that we have a pretty good rounded group of folks. But if people know of others that we can reach out to, please let me know and we'll invite them as well. And it doesn't have to be for that same day. We don't have to create a panel in less than a month, but to try and get them in to speak, just to give more clarity and add complexity to some of the things that we're looking at.
Thank you, Dan. Lois.
With Rachel Brownberg. And also, I think the Policing Services Committee meeting, there was a discussion about inviting Elisa Klein to talk about domestic violence. And I don't know whatever happened to that, but maybe I just don't want to lose that thread of her being invited to participate in this.
Thank you. Dan, can you remind us who Rachel is?
Yeah, so Rachel Brownberg is the co-founder of the Reach Out Response Network, also the Canadian National Coordinator for the International Mobile Services Association. And she also works with a network of service providers across Canada and the US, building civilian-led mobile crisis services in different communities. She's also a member of the Toronto Regional Humane Services and Justice Coordinating Committee, and the Center for Addiction and Mental Health Constituency Council. So all over the place. Like if I were to pull up the rest of her CV, it's just pages and pages long. But there's years of commitment to this kind of work. And we have reached out to Elisa, and I met with her last night, and she shared a bunch of resources with me that I'll give out to the commission as well. I can invite her to speak. I don't know if that's necessarily something she wants to do, but I can invite her to speak to the commission as well.
Thank you, Dan. Nick?
A couple of things. I just want to clarify, Javier, just to be clear, I believe it was Pam, was it Pam Schwartz who came to?
Yeah, you're right.
Right, okay, thanks. And Elisa, can you just fill us in on Elisa? Somebody, Dan maybe.
Sorry, could you say that again?
Who is Elisa?
Elisa Klein is a former city council member, but she has also done, I'm going to say, believe it's close to 2 decades worth of work on restorative justice, and work with domestic violence survivors and victims of intimate partner violence. But she is a wealth of knowledge in terms of models of restorative and transformative justice, and where they've worked, where they haven't worked, and is able to complicate and contextualize the issue of how these programs are deployed, and where they may or may not resonate.
Thank you, Dan. Lois?
Somebody wrote to the commission and suggested Alex Vitale. And I don't know if people know who he is. He writes a lot about policing and how it works and how it doesn't work. He's professor, I think, at Brooklyn College, and he's written a number of books. He's on, talking head on all of these talk shows. And I think he would be an interesting person for us to hear from, just as an overall grounding about policing. And so I have a feeling he's a pretty busy guy, but if people are interested, then I suggest that people just Google him. And maybe at the next meeting, if people are interested, I mean, I could try to contact him. He spoke at Hampshire just a few months ago. And I think he's a Hampshire grad from way back. And maybe not so way back, but somewhat way back. And so he does have connections to this area, so he might be more open to doing something for us.
Thank you. Booker?
So, by the way, I'm also in touch with Elisa Klein because we want to do a session sort of on what should the response be for domestic violence. I guess I want to ask the larger committee. I'm more than glad to be able to sit into the larger meetings and have speakers there. It's a good thing because we can all hear what they have to say. And I got a little bit of sorrow about the fact that we had speakers that when we had Pam Schwartz and other people at our meeting, that there was some disappointment, especially since we happened at the same time as another committee about that. But the value of doing it in the smaller subcommittee process, it's actually easier to interchange and do questions. Frankly, I find it hard with this many people involved in the meeting to be able to do an in-depth discussion. So I guess what I'd like to ask is, there's some things that I think work better having a person at a specific subcommittee, because the subcommittee is dealing with certain kinds of problems and issues? Or does it work better in the larger process? And I'm not sure how that works. So, for instance, I want to have a session about talking about domestic violence, and I imagine that we would need representation from Safe Passage, which is the main provider here. I think Elisa would say, well, we should look at Safe Passage, but maybe we need to look beyond Safe Passage and look for other alternative ways of dealing with it. And I guess the hard part here is, does that work better to be in this process, meaning this room that we're sitting in now, or does that work better within a smaller subcommittee? And how to think about that. So that's what I have to say.
Any thoughts on that?
So I think I can't raise my hand, but I think the nature of this and the way that it works, we are often at the mercy of things where we have to sort of in some way gesticulate or announce that we have a question, and then it gets put into an order and a queue, and it does lose some of that sort of natural back and forth that happens in a larger space. And I think that's something that we have to wrestle with. And I think part of that is also the structure. We are sort of limited in some ways. This does make disseminating information a little easier if everybody has a space, even though it becomes a little bit difficult with the sort of questions and that interchange. I think one thing that we can do for this is to try and schedule a time to meet with speakers, and as part of our work in our subcommittees, to think of things that we would like to ask so that they can focus on those things if they're presenting material beforehand, and that we can work together to sort of figure out a set of questions that we would like to ask in general that they can make part of either their presentation, or that we can say, question and answer, we have these structured questions, these 5 questions that are sort of burning or percolating or would guide us. And then beyond that, we can ask the question of, we can start to have those exchanges as well afterwards. Again, it's not going to be as easy as it would be if we were all in the same space, maybe. But I think we can still work on that. I'd also say there's always going to be better systems and ways. So if folks have different ideas about facilitation of these, and it could very well be that there's at a very specific issue level, maybe that's something that's better for a subcommittee. If it's very broad or would encompass the work of multiple subcommittees, maybe it's worth bringing that in, or having a joint subcommittee meeting where there's 10 people instead of 15, which sounds a little absurd, but any reduction in numbers might make those exchanges a little easier. So just my thoughts.
Thank you, Dan. Lois?
I would just ask, I don't have a comment on all of that, but if once we do decide, or any subcommittee or the commission or however it is, if there could be a list that gets put out to everybody that is sort of separate from this list of, these agendas, where maybe we're looking at everybody's agenda, but maybe we're not, and saying who's invited and when they're going to come, and so that we can make sure to show up and hear them.
Javier?
Yeah, 2 things. The first one is that I think that would be really, really useful for us to find either how Lois is saying, how Dan is saying, a way that everybody benefits and of these speakers coming here and getting the same amount of knowledge. Because my perception so far, there have been several instances where it may be that some commissioners are assuming that something was not talked. And I'm thinking, well, our subcommittee talked about that. So there is a hard flow of information. It's really hard to either attend to a subcommittee and you are not participating, or it's really complicated to watch the entire recording. So I think that it's necessary, now that we're going to start having more speakers to come, to find a concrete way to make that available to everybody, so we can start sharing the same common knowledge, and also this a common vocabulary. That's the first one. And the second one is, I was wondering, I was talking with some members of the community. Somebody pointed out to me that the Policing Practices Subcommittee decided that now they are going to start looking to alternatives to policing. Is that something that it's accurate to say? And if it is, I think the Alternative to Policing Subcommittee should know, and we should talk about it. If that's the case, I'm super happy about it, and maybe we can coordinate between the other two groups and maybe make one single group. I don't know. But if that's the case, I feel that we should talk about it. And if not, I'm happy to move forward with whatever we're talking about.
I can answer that, Javier. Should I respond directly to that? Okay, should I do that, Dana?
Please.
Okay, sure.
Dana.
So, Javier, yes, it's true that in the subcommittee meeting, it's become up many times that as we pursue our primary goal, which is to kind of document the existing policies and practices that the Northampton Police is currently exercising, it has come up routinely that it would be sometimes helpful for us to have some kind of comparison about what's happening in the Northampton Police Department and what might be happening in other settings. What we've done now is we've sort of, each of us has kind of drilled down on a particular topic that interests us in the Northampton Police Department, and we've sort of assigned ourselves the task of documenting what's happening in the current policies, but also to try to come into the next meeting with some kind of alternative that we could, for just that one narrow thing that each of us is looking at, so that we can have a context to drive the discussion forward. So we don't think of it as anything near as comprehensive as what the other subcommittee is entertaining, and I don't think it would be advantageous to engage in an extra level of bureaucracy to link up our subcommittees. I think this was done in the spirit of realizing that it's valuable in doing intellectual work sometimes to have an appropriate control group, comparison group, and that when you proceed down a road simply using what you see in front of you, it makes it sometimes hard to see what else is possible. So this was kind of a very limited look at alternatives to just one particular narrow thing that each one of us might be looking at. And it was only one alternative, not a comprehensive alternative. And of course, anybody else in the committee who remembers it differently could certainly chime in, but that's my 2 cents.
I really appreciate that you think that what we are doing is like high level, because we are talking about this and trying to figure it out in the same way how anybody else is trying to do it. And maybe, I would find a lot of value if both chairs of both subcommittees share information about alternatives and whatever you find, because you can find something that we haven't thought about it. And I think that would and vice versa, and that would add up to the work that both subcommittees are doing.
That sounds very reasonable. So happy to forward whatever we come up with and share. Just my only hesitation is not wanting to slow down our process with further complications of communication. I wouldn't want to make it so we couldn't proceed without consulting, but certainly sharing the fruits of our labor is what we all should be about. So I'm happy to do that, and I think I'll remind the rest of our committee to do that.
Okay, before we get off agenda, I just want to make sure that by having this conversation, it's not, I guess, in violation of what needs to be on the agenda versus conversational free flow. I don't know. Any veteran people's input would be most appreciated. Michael, you're smiling.
I'm smiling because I thought Alex was going to answer.
I can try. Yeah, when something says announcement of speakers for commission and subcommittees, that doesn't leave a lot of room for discussion. I don't know if there's any other area on here that could be considered that.
No,
Perhaps not.
I was
So
going
I-
through.
it seems like we should stick to the, what the announcement of those.
Right. Thank you. Sorry, y'all. Cynthia? Oh, wait. Sorry, Carol's next, and then Cynthia. But Cynthia, did you have something that was directly related to this?
Just going back to our other discussion about when to have speakers, but I can hold off.
Yeah, that's what I'm going back to speakers.
Okay.
Carol and then Cynthia.
Yeah, I would just echo what has been said by other people in the last couple of minutes, that I feel like it's important to have some mechanism to choose to attend a subcommittee where there's some speaker from the field coming in. Whether that's done by looking, I know there's a certain efficiency in just having the tasks of each subcommittee be the tasks of that subcommittee. And there is an efficiency, but I personally, in the speakers we've had in recent weeks, feel like I've heard very powerful testimony from program developers and people who worked in alternative areas for so many years that it moves me, intellectually and, internally to, a position about, where we ought to come out on, our recommendations. And, I think that structurally speaking, when you have 3 subcommittees and then the final report is supposed to be some coherent document, that it's really important for each of us to have at least the opportunity to experience in some primary way, or by inputting our questions, as has been mentioned, to the subcommittee that's having the speakers. If there's some conflict of time and we can't obviously attend everything, we can't experience in a primary way every single speaker. But whatever the mechanism is, whether it's having subcommittee meetings on different nights, or whether it's asking people from other subcommittees to, input questions for the relevant subcommittee to address with the speaker, one way or the other, I think it's going to be, our process will be better when it comes down to making some kind of coherent set of recommendations to the city. Because some people are more focused on institutional remedies, and some people are more focused on alternatives or way alternatives. And, it would be important for us to have as many experiences as we can with these speakers in the field. So that's it.
Thank you. Cynthia?
Yeah, echoing what Carol said, but not repeating it. I just want to mention about Elisa Klein. Lois mentioned Elisa, and Booker mentioned Elisa, and Dan mentioned Elisa, and Elisa's on my list to contact. So here we have a very valuable contact who might be, normally she's on our Zooms here, but she might be wondering how many times is she going to say the same thing. So I feel like I missed a really great opportunity with some of the speakers that occurred so far. And I just wish there was a way we can share this so that we can all hear what they have to say, because we're all doing, as Carol said, little pieces of this work. And I think I don't have an answer to that as to how that can happen other than dedicating time in the full commission. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. Nick?
Yes, it was clearly, I don't know whether I'd call it an error. It wasn't a good thing that we scheduled 2 of our meetings on the same night. It happened by accident, and I let people know that I would do everything possible to avoid that from happening again. I agree with Booker's idea that that the subcommittees are a good place for the meetings with some of these speakers. I don't know how much it has to be structured, but I do feel that the smaller group allows for more focused meeting with the person. I had something else I wanted to say about that. The recordings. How can we access? For example, I'd like to look at the meeting that took place with the Alternatives Committee and these meeting with these speakers, and I'm not clear how to access the recordings. It doesn't seem like they're up right after the meeting. And if anybody, that's another way we can hear a speaker if we weren't able to attend a subcommittee meeting. Any help with that?
They go up pretty quickly. They're on Northampton Open Media's YouTube page. Please, someone correct me if I'm wrong. I feel confident that it's there.
So I would go to their website, or?
I'm sure if you Google Northampton Open Media YouTube,
Okay.
Dan just posted the link in the chat.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Ooh, Booker.
So, by the way, I've been trying to find the recordings of that alternatives meeting, and as best I can, and I've been on that site, and it's not there yet, and I'm not sure why it's not there yet. I am going to continue. If we have speakers at our committee, I did send around an email to everyone saying we have this speaker in case you're interested, because I don't look at all of the individual meetings agendas. It's too many extra steps to get there. So I'm going to continue to do that, but it's really hard to get assurances that the speakers we think are going to be there are going to be there. So that's what makes it really hard to get advance notice out. But I will, if I know we have a speaker, I'm going to send around another email just saying this speaker is going to be there, just to make it easier for everybody else. So.
Thank you, Booker. I'm wondering also if there's a way when there's the YouTube videos to find where that minute is for the recording and sharing that. So we know that we have the speaker from 16 minutes to 35 minutes or something. Just a thought. Javier?
Yeah, so I agree with Booker and Nick that the small setting generates a better conversation, more thoughtful than a huge setting. That's for sure. But also that has to go hand to hand with the access to information, being able to find the videos, and also what Booker was pointing out, which is to promote when somebody's coming, to tell others. And sometimes that's extremely difficult because we get, we get an email confirming that that person is attending probably the same day or the day before, and that's make things complicated. Also, I want to point out that my question to the other committee is extremely in relationship to speakers, because I was concerned that if another subcommittee was talking about alternatives, they may also invite experts or people working in the field. So because we're talking about the speakers, I just want a clarification about that, so I don't feel that it's out of the purview of this item.
Fair enough, and to clarify, we're not looking to invite speakers, just to answer that.
Thank you.
Awesomeness. Are we ready to move on to the next topic, or? So I think the agreed thing is that if folks have speakers for their subcommittees, they will invite people. If we want a speaker for the larger group, we have a list of folks that we are inviting. All right, I'm going to move on. Discussion of improving outreach from the outreach committee. Oh, no, there is no outreach committee. So last week, last week, Javier, Dan, and I met and we're talking about what are some ways that we might get more engagement from folks in the community and who may not have access to Zoom, computers, phones. I feel like this kind of ties also in with the anonymity, which is number 8 on our agenda. And I think we came up with maybe the idea of having an outreach subcommittee. All right. Any thoughts, or Javier?
Can I just jump in one? So it wasn't a subcommittee, it was a working group. So it's not like forming a new committee that's going to interview. It's just a group of folks who don't meet quorum, but that would be working and could report back. But just people who could dedicate some of their time, some of the free time, some of the free time that we all have so much of, but that they could dedicate some time to working on some of these issues and being part of this communications sort of outreach, because it is going to require some dedicated thought.
What Dan said. Javier?
Yeah, I think for me this comes from the meeting before the big public hearing meeting that we spent, in my judgment, extreme amount of time talking about questions, sort of topic questions, rather than talking how do we manage to get people that conventionally wouldn't have the privilege just to turn out a computer and see us and to be able to talk. So my concern came from that. In the meeting that we have with Dana and Dan, the point of it's not a committee, it's not a subcommittee. It's a working group that would see strategies to be able to do this outreach and to be able to do it in a way that it's not against any kind of law, existing state law, right? And there were some ideas through there. Anonymity is one of the most difficult things that probably we're going to have to deal with testimonies. Also, how you approach it. You can approach it from the point of view of a specific testimony, which is pretty easy to figure it out who is the one talking, because it's not that we have the volume of incidents like Springfield, Boston, New York. But certainly we need to be really intentional of this and really specific about this. And again, and I'm going to say it again, be conscious about our privilege. And they need to be able to accommodate and plan to have the participation of the more wider affected community.
Thank you. Any thoughts about this? Overwhelming interest? Alex?
I think it's a great idea. I was just cautioned that, and I think you should check with the city solicitor about it. That my understanding is that if this commission tasks any more than one person with something that they then that is in their official capacity, and then they are reporting back that needs to be a subcommittee and needs to be a posted meeting when they're discussing business. However, if they are doing things like there's an exception for something called site visits. So where as long as they're not discussing their charge or deliberating on anything, but are going out and talking with people, that wouldn't have to be a posted meeting. So I just want to caution to make sure to know to do it right. So I would suggest, and I don't have all the information on it, so I'd suggest contacting the city solicitor about how to do that.
Thank you, Alex. So we need to do that. I would hate for us to move forward and have this all solidified and we're not actually able to do it. So with that said,
In that case, I would move to table this until the next general meeting.
Just taking notes. So speaking of tabled discussion, our next item was a tabled discussion from our last full committee meeting on police attendance at commissions and subcommittee meetings. And I feel like this has come up a lot and we haven't decided anything. Booker?
So I feel quite strongly I don't know if we need permission to invite representatives of the police department to our meetings. I actually feel quite strongly that we need input from the police department about some of their processes and how they're doing things. So for instance, in talking about alternatives to policing for mental health calls, although we have a lot of information from other departments and other places in the country, I think it's really important to hear how the Northampton police would describe their process. And I don't think we could legitimately say, here's the alternative we want to put in place without having heard what they have to say about that. Now, I feel sort of weird about, quote, do we need permission to do this? I guess I guess what I think this comes from a place. I'm going to be really transparent now. I'm going to be really transparent. So it feels like we don't want to ask the police what they're doing about this, and therefore we don't want to invite them. I think that's not the best approach when we're about to recommend possible change. I think we need to have some input. And I have a lot of emails from people saying, please get input before you recommend a change. So that's actually what I feel and what I think. But I think that's why this discussion is here.
Thank you. I don't know if we were asking for input. Permission. I think it was more, there's two different feelings about inviting the police. And so fleshing that out and making a decision. I could be. Josie?
Sure thing. Personally, I don't think we need to invite the police. Almost every single one of our meetings has been public. It has had time for public comment. Even our subcommittees had time for public comment. If police really wanted to come out here and discuss with us and have discourse with us, they would be here in these meetings, especially because it pertains to them. Secondly, we've asked for tons of information, tons of data from the police department themselves, and most of it is accompanied by some snippets on what they do and how they're doing it. To assume that we are in absolute zero discussion with the police is completely untrue. That frankly, the lack of police presence in the public comment says, if anything to me, that they are purposely not engaging with this group. And for me, from my perspective, it feels like a way to undermine what we're doing and delegitimize the conversations we're having here, because then it puts the onus on us as a committee to reach out and olive branch them when, one, they should be here, and two, the comments are public. Like, they can come here and talk. And they're choosing not to do so. And so that sounds more like a decision on their part rather than a decision on our part. And that's my honest feeling about it.
Thank you, Josie. Javier?
So in the case that we're not talking about the permission on permission, at the end of the day, we can invite whoever we want, and the person who is being invited would have to figure it out if they need permission or not. But besides that, so I agree with Josie's comment, but in my specific case, I would have to say that, from the very beginning, I brought to the table that I want to hear the cops' narrative. And that's literally the phrase that I use. I wanna hear their narrative. So, and the reason why, first of all, is I respect how other members of this commission respect their own thought process of other commissioners. And there are other people that they would need for their own thought process and for the analysis to hear that part of it. With that being said, what I would like as a brown immigrant to state that the police department is inherently racist in a white supremacist system and people believe me, I will love that because it's true. But but at the same time, I know the reality that we live. And again, I think that would be good from my point of view to have them coming, not as a special guest at all, just as one or any other speaker, and because I would like to hear the narrative.
Thank you. Alex?
Thank you. I would like to invite the police or be able to do that. I think, they are experts in how things are done now, and I want to understand the requirements that they face, like from the state, for example, about mandatory arrest policies and mandatory reporting. Yes, a lot of that information we can get through other means, but both the information and how it is presented is important. And I really appreciate having frank discussions with people that I may not agree with. And I think it's important to hear the objections to specifically in Northampton, objections to potential alternatives that we're proposing. And I'm coming from an alternatives perspective because I'm on that committee. But to hear those so we can research and understand whether we think those objections are valid or how to frame our arguments about it. So I have reached out to members of the police, and they have indicated that they would be happy to come speak, and kind of waiting for that invitation to go through our committee, rather than just having more one-on-one conversations. So that's my viewpoint.
Thank you. Nandi?
Yeah, I just basically want to agree with Booker's position. The way you articulated sort of matches essentially mine. I think that this process will not be credible without a active effort to kind of understand the police narrative, to pose questions about our interpretation about whatever data we get from them. So the data will almost never stand on its own and will require some sense of kind of how, we'll have to say how we're interpreting it, and then have a sense of whether there's agreement about how we're interpreting it. So I guess I'm making the bold claim that the failure to include the police in this process, I think, deeply damages our work. It will make it lack credibility to the broader society. It will do grave harm, and it may even lead to our recommendations not being taken seriously by the mayor and making all of this worthless. So I think that being selective in how we use the police, the questions we pose to them, it makes sense. And also, in response to Josie, it's actually factually not correct that the police have not been here in public forum. They were here in the last big public forum in significant numbers and voiced concern. So I think it's important that we, and one of these things is we're trying to sort of get at what is factually correct. And so truth matters in this process. And we want to try to have a process that allows us to get the best version of the truth we can. And it involves inviting all perspectives so we can arrive at what we think is the most accurate picture. Thanks.
Thank you. Dan?
Yeah, so when it comes to inviting police officers, especially, I mean, anyone is welcome to make a public comment, right? Like they can come in, they have their 3 minutes, they could go. I don't think anyone has identified themselves as a police officer during their public comment, but maybe they were, or maybe they just joined, or maybe they were just listening, and like they can join the meeting to listen. They could also just watch the meeting online. So like looking at the participant list, all we have is whether or not people spoke or not, and if they identified themselves. I think what I'm concerned with, and this is something that Javier's touched on, I think we can ask very specific, pointed questions. We can ask for clarification of our, like, we can say, this is what we're seeing in the information that you've provided to us. You know, what does that mean? But it needs to be very specific. What I fear, there are two different things. So one is that we are inviting a body that is, or representatives of a body that is essentially under review into a process. And that's, you know, we should understand what the police are doing. That is something, but we also, I mean, for me anyway, the important part is what we want to see. You know, sort of looking at this backwards design, you know, throw out everything that is now, look at what you want, and then design backwards. And sort of looking at what we want, which doesn't necessarily have to involve the police, or it could involve a gigantic police department as a giant military state, right? Whatever it is that we want the end result to be, we look backwards and define that in the process. So focusing too much on what the police are doing now and what their understanding of their role is, I don't know how much that moves forward this conversation when, you know, we're talking about all these different alternatives. I don't think it's necessarily, the other part about this is that there is a power dynamic that we have to pay attention to, that these are officers or representatives of a department that holds a lot of power over a lot of different people. Particularly these people that we're talking about bringing in, that we want to focus and hear because they're marginalized. And there's a very real tension that I think we need to sit with to figure out what that actually means, especially for the outreach that we're supposed to have. I'm also a little concerned that the idea that if we don't invite representatives as official representatives of the department, that we are somehow not legitimate. Or that the work that we present is somehow less legitimate is a little bit concerning to me. Again, that gets to the sort of like, there are two sides and we're creating that. Like we're saying, yes, we must listen to the opposition, which really puts us in a position that I'm not happy with. It also puts them in a position I'm not happy with. And I think it's going to be really important to sort of, if we're going to invite them, and I'm saying, I would certainly say I'm hesitant. I think the biggest thing is, if that happens, that we need to be really intentional with what we're asking and understanding what we want from that interaction, like what information we need. If it's just understanding a narrative, does that require, you know, an interaction, or can we just ask for a document? The email from Chief Casper with the first information that we got had tons of unsolicited things in it. And little notes and little side bits, which is fine, but that tells you what their narrative is, because it tells you how at least Chief Casper is looking at this information and understanding our requests in relation to what they do. So I think really thinking intentionally, does the information that we're looking for need a back and forth, or is it just question and answer? If it's question and answer rather than a discussion, does it need to be part of the meeting, or can it just be a request from the department? Does this need to be some sort of synchronous meeting? And really thinking about that very carefully. That's all I have.
Thank you, Dan. Carol?
Yeah, I'll try to be short because others have spoken a lot of the things that are on my mind, especially Nnamdi and Dan. You know, we're talking about preparing to generate some powerful recommendations to the city for policy change. And, you know, one of the things that has been so fascinating and wonderful to me is that there's been a real sort of community organizing spirit that has created the need for this commission, and it carries us forward with all the input from people who attend our meetings and send us notes and thoughts and information. But, you know, bottom line is, as others have said, you know, there is a power dimension here. I would hate that we would go through this, you know, thorough going process of reflecting on what we need to do with money that's removed from the police department and allocated elsewhere, and just have it not ever operationalized because we never invited the relevant force to interview in, like a hearing type of thing. I agree that we have to have specific questions about police processes and how members of the force think about the processes and relate to the processes and identify with the processes. That will be very revealing to us about how we really feel about the need for alternatives. And, I just guess I would remind us all that institutional change really doesn't happen without examining, in a sustainable way. Institutional change doesn't happen just with community organizing. It has to be examining all potential ways forward. And, I really believe that, if I were 20, 30 or 40 years younger, I would say, keep them police out of here. But I don't think at my advanced age that I feel that we will toxify our process in any way by having police presence, especially if we invite them and have specific questions, as others have said. So I'm really interested in having this commission deliver some major, powerful, bold recommendations to the city and have some, if not all of them, adopted. And I really think that it really would boomerang on us if we only read police reports, which are really not that revealing about what a dispatch is and what a service is that gets provided. It really doesn't tell us a lot. We need, as Javier has been saying right along, we need the narrative that's going to be useful.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you for that. I think coming back to what Nadia and Dan have also said is, in all of this information that we're gathering and all this time we're taking in kind of pulling things apart around recommendations on how to move forward within this, we're looking at an institution. We're also looking at an institution within a system. We also, I think, are making a big mistake by not recognizing our own place, this commission's place within the system and within the institution. And when I think the big kind of thing that we're missing is that this commission really doesn't have any power. And what we can offer is a recommendation. We're offering recommendations that will, that the city council, the mayor may or may not accept. They're going to have a tremendous amount of pressure from the police department, from the unions, to to completely disregard whatever it is we come forward with. So all of those forces that have kept the system and the oppressive system in place all these years and continue to make it grow, those things have not gone away because there's this commission. And so I think not only to think that somehow bringing police, or the police perspective or the police narrative, as if the narrative is not, we're not swimming in that narrative every single day, through all of the dominant narratives out there. I think I have a really great idea of what the narrative is. I think all of us do. So I don't think that's missing at all. And more so, this commission is this tiny little push that we can offer to not at all, like, it's not to not displace that narrative, but to make it hard and thorny for that narrative to continue as it's always been. And I think that bringing police here and spending all of our valuable time, in listening to a narrative that we are all swimming in and day out, and not only swimming in, but that has power over all of us. And the power, not just it's structural power to, where it sits within the city and we citizen residents, but power also to take our lives, take our freedom, and really, take our citizenship, and who we are as citizens in this country. So, that's a tremendous amount of power. And this commission sits as a thorn, tiny little thorn that we can do to disrupt some of that narrative. So I think that as we're trying to think about balance, we'd be remiss to not think about our commission in the structure and in the system from which it sits. It is tiny. So are we going to give up this tiny kind of thorn that we can be, to take up the time to invite additional narrative within this particular structure, within this particular commission? And I think that's the question. I feel like I don't think that's worth the time. That pressure, that influence, that power is going to be there once we put this report on somebody's desk. That is going to be an outsized level of influence. So the more clear and strong we can be around spending our minutes and time with the alternatives, with the critical investigation of narrowing the footprint of this institution, that's going to be the time that no one else is going to spend on it. So how do we want to proceed? But for me, I feel like our best bet is to proceed with the thing that no one else will touch once we're done with it. Let's be that thorn. Let's focus in on that, and know that whatever it is we put in front of somebody's desk is going to be deeply watered down by the time it ends up somewhere. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Josie?
Yeah, I definitely want to agree and echo what Elizabeth has just put forward. It also feels like to me that asking the police to come and giving some of our precious meeting time to platform them when, as Elizabeth has put it, we are already swimming in their narrative, to me seems like nothing more than just an appeal to authority. Not only to an appeal to authority, but it also seems to me that that this idea that if we don't bring on police narrative as like a cornerstone of our proposals, that it somehow delegitimizes all the hard work that we've done. It sounds like to me that these inherent state structures are going to do what they're going to do. And that's more reason for us to push for broader, more radical changes, because like Elizabeth said, it's just going to be watered down. This commission holds no real power but to push the city of Northampton, towards something better. And as we've seen so much support for that kind of message, I definitely want to echo the idea that we push for something radical. Also, it feels like to me that we're settling for civility, like this idea that civility, that our message and our work is any less valuable just because we aren't appealing to the authority and the white supremacist system that is policing here in America, which is something that I definitely want us all to think about. Because I know that I'm putting in a lot of hard work reading some of the data and trying to parse through it with many of my fellow commissioners, and to think that that just goes out the window because I didn't have a police officer here spoon feed me the narrative that we all already are getting on the day-to-day seems totally ludicrous to me.
Thank you. Dan?
Yeah, I'll make this really brief, just because it's something that I think we sort of touched on this already, but I think the real question is, what would we get? What questions would we ask the police department that we don't already either know or have very good sense on based on the information that we've already got? Are we asking them, oh, well, this is what's in your handbook, but do you do something completely different? Like, do you break your policies on a regular basis? That seems like it's going to be a really weird question. If we're asking them, oh, what things would, would you like to have a lower budget? I mean, they could ask for less money every year, right? If that was something that was on the chief's mind, they could ask for that. So like, what are we really asking for? If we're asking, and I think we should be really specific, because we are inviting people to give public comment in a myriad number of ways. If police officers themselves wanted to speak as community members who do not have necessarily more power or influence than any other person that we're asking as part of the process itself, they could speak. So I think I would like to know what people want to know, because I can't think of anything on my own that we don't have reasonable information on already. And I think that's where I am. Like, I'm not sure what the process would give us that we couldn't just ask them directly in an email and get text response back.
Thanks you. Nick?
I think that the legitimacy of our recommendations does require some approaching the police in some way, and I'm not sure exactly what that should be, whether it's structured questions. But one example might be what Booker referenced, would be to find out what their narrative is around mental health. We don't know. I don't think you can tell what the narrative is just by reading the answers to our questions and by looking at their policies. And I think that I think that we need to come up with a way to bring them in to legitimize any recommendations from this group. That's it.
Thank you. David Hoos? I don't know why I said your last name, but I did. Yeah, I'll be brief, because I think at this point everybody's kind of hit on the relevant things. I agree with Booker and Namdi and Dan. To me, it's a question of credibility. I think we have to make some effort to get responses to certain questions. I do agree with Dan, however, that I think we need to have a list of questions that we want. I mean, we're not inviting them to debate, and I think it's important we understand that we're inviting them because we need information, we need answers to questions so that we can move our work forward. They know perfectly well what we're up to, several people have talked about, have used the phrase, we're inviting the police. I mean, I don't know about anybody else, but the only person I want to hear from is the chief. I don't envision inviting a stream of police officers to hear what their day-to-day life is on the street. I don't see any point in that. I think, as others have said, we basically have an understanding of that. But there are questions, and Nick touched on one of them. I mean, I would like to know exactly what happens when you get a call that seems to be a mental health call. I've said this before. I think that may be an area where the police might be perfectly happy to get rid of at least part of that. And we may not agree with them as to how far they get rid of it. We've seen, in looking over the logs, property checks. What is that? Why? Who makes those calls? What's the priority to responding to them? What are you responding to? Who do you report to? I don't know the answers to any of those questions. So, to just sum up, I think we do need to invite the chief, and I think we need to have specific questions for her. Thank you. Lois?
Well, I echo what Elizabeth and Dan and Josie have said, and so I won't go through. I was about to say many of those same things. One thing I do want to say in terms of whatever we submit, whether we talk to the police for an hour or we talk to the police for a day, the police will be the police union and the police themselves will be organizing in opposition to what we're proposing, I suspect, in the same way that the police and the police unions um, have mounted a huge campaign to defeat the so-called policing reform bill that's on the governor's desk right now, which has turned out to be a very moderate bill because of their lobbying and because of their opposition to any change at all that's coming from the state. And we're seeing that playing out now. And so there's no reason to think that that even though we're like this tiny little version of it, everybody will be experiencing that same thing and that same organized opposition that anybody that was trying to, quote, reform the police within the state experienced. And actually they may succeed. I mean, the bill isn't signed yet. And so, or things can be taken out because of that. And so I think that we're going to experience that here. And I do want to say, just reiterate what Elizabeth said about, hearing the police narrative. I'm not exactly sure what that is, that narrative, but I mean, that idea of the police narrative, but I think that that's not what we're asking for anything. We are not asking for that narrative. We're not asking for their story. We're asking, to me, if we end up asking for anything, I mean, David's questions, very specific questions of a specific person in a very time-limited way. But in essence, I am not in favor of it, but if we do end up with something like that, that would be the only way that I could see us going forward. Not a platform at all.
Thank you, Lois. Namdi and then Cynthia.
All right, I guess the main thing I want to convey here is that inviting a police perspective or hearing from them, adding that to our conversation does not logically mean that we have to accept it uncritically, does not mean that we have to have a report that somehow is a 50-50 split between the police perspective and the opposite perspective. I'm saying this because this argument against having the police has come up many times. I wish I could convince you that it's not a great argument. We do it because we're interested in having that perspective so we can respond to it with whatever we think is the best recommendation. If I can give an example of how this is relevant, several weeks ago, I suggested that we should invite public comment, both opposed to the police and favorable to the police. And there was objection to the idea that we should invite public comment that could be favorable on the grounds that it would be a reinforcement of the police narrative. We actually did get comments last week that were some of which were favorable to the police. And I think there was value in some of those comments, even those I disagreed with. So somebody from the public came forward and said, we need to have school resource officers because my daughter felt ashamed talking to me about certain things that happened to her, and thank God she had her police officer at school to talk to. I think it was important for us to hear that kind of testimony because we want to be able to propose, I think, easy alternatives to a school police officer does not need to be doing that particular role. So as we understand clearly what it is, what the functions are, what's being done, what the police say is essential. So again, this is a community member telling us, here's a crucial role for somebody in the police that helped my child. And I think our report would want to be able to address how do we replace those concerns? But we want to be able to hear what those are. We want to hear from the police. We want to hear from people who are friendly to the police. And we don't have to accept their point of view that we need to have a police officer in the school to respond to children who have concerns that could be taken to a guidance counselor. So I think that we don't want to conflate the two. Hearing the perspective doesn't mean accepting the perspective. It means we've got a clear picture of what people believe policing is good for. And that when I say people, I mean people who actually live in Northampton. I guess that's the second point, is that it is fundamentally illogical to presume that we can apply what we know about policing, in general, to Northampton policing. So we definitely want to get a clear picture from the police department, from the citizens of Northampton, that tells us about what they believe policing does for them, so that any report that we give to the mayor's office really answers those needs with credible alternatives and meets the needs of all the people who are sort of that we're responsible to address. So I guess that's basically my point. Again, circling back to the beginning, we don't need to presume that taking a police perspective means that we are accepting the police perspective. We're just hearing about it and thinking about how to respond to it. That's it.
Thank you, Cynthia, and then Dan.
Yeah, I really like the analogy that Elizabeth posed about being a thorn. And I can pretty much guarantee that cops, police departments are talking to one another, their associations, their unions, quite a bit about what's happening in this country. And they know, they know that we're thorns, and they know there's pressure. And to respond to Dan's question, the one comment I would like to ask the chief, nobody else, just the chief, is, do you think you need to change? And if so, how? And that's the narrative right there for me. And also, I could ask a second question: what would you like to tell this commission? And that's it. That's what I would like to know from the chief. Do you think there's an opportunity here for the police department to rethink itself? Now, no matter what we do, we're still going to be that thorn, and we're still going to come up with alternatives and recommendations. But I would like to hear what they think, and that's going to pin down that narrative for me.
Thank you. Dan?
So I just want to circle back for a second, because the whole, we were talking about, asking, posing questions to the general public, about the police, before the public hearing. It wasn't that we can't have a statement that the police are liked, right? That's not the issue. The issue is asking the question in a meaningful way. If you're just asking, do you like the police or not? Or what do you like about the police? Like, without any meaningful discussion about without a meaningful way to take apart what they're actually saying. Are they saying they like the police because the police are first responders? Are they saying they like the police because they have family members who are police officers and they're worried about their family member and their job and their future? Are they saying they like the police? Like, without asking and knowing and being really careful and intentional about the way that we ask questions, and really good questions. And I think a lot of us here have experiences with doing research, and especially human subjects research. You spend weeks thinking about what question you're going to ask that gets you the data that you need to answer the question that you're really posing. And to just throw it out there, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but to just throw it out there is just, oh, we should ask the police, we should ask people if they like the police or not, and that should be a big question. That doesn't seem like it's going to get us the answer that we need, or any real information to move us forward. So I'm not saying we can't ask for who likes the police or not and what services they like or not, but I think we really need to be intentional and either ask specifically about police in a way that's meaningful and generates the information that we need, or to broadly ask about community safety and crisis response in a meaningful way. And I'm not sure I know how to do that now. And I've been thinking about this for weeks. So like, it's not like we're going to have people that have had good experiences with the Northampton Police Department. I mean, that's A, random chance, and B, part of how the system is designed. I always give the experience that one of my friends, her father was stopped right outside of where I live, where I had also been stopped, and for the same issue, which was a few days out of an inspection sticker. I got threatened, told that my car should be towed, everything else. This older white man said, "Oh, can I just walk to the Dunkin' Donuts while you write out my ticket?" And he was allowed to. So different people are going to have different experiences. It's built into the system. And again, I think we need to be present and all on the same page of how we're going to disentangle that when we're soliciting comments. And if we're soliciting narrative information, how we disentangle all of those things. I'm not saying we don't ask for it, but again, I'm focusing on what questions we ask to be able to know or get information that we need to know to answer the broader questions of where do we go. That's where I am. And like that's my concern with all of this.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
Thank you for that. I think definitely, trying to understand the right questions to ask. Another place where I feel like if we're going to have a perspective on not necessarily pro-police or pro-Northampton police, but something I'd really like to start to uncover, I think, is also when I'm hearing those responses around good, pro-police or wanting to have a robust Northampton Police Department. I think we haven't invited yet or asked anyone to come forward to talk about, the real, economic impact of a police force and those individuals in those jobs. I think that, and then we did see some of that in the testimony, both written and verbal, that people were talking about, having family members, relatives. We were talking about these are, police jobs are good, really good paying middle class jobs, and one where that's a few and far between, not just nationally, but especially in the state and in this community. So I think, part of what I've been struggling with too is not knowing on the one hand where we'd like to be very bold and progressive around some of the recommendations, but also understanding that it's not just the police department that's part of a white supremacist structure, but that there's real families that have also been given this choice around, how do you make a good living and a good, for your family. These are the middle class jobs that are available, and one of them includes policing your own community. So these are trade-offs that people have been presented with, but I think it's worth talking about what are some of those pressures that the communities that we care deeply about are also interested in. I don't want to say pro-police, but they're interested in how this particular system or institution continues or thrives based on the benefits that they're getting. Again, this is built in, right? This is built into why it continues to perpetuate. But I think we'd be remiss to not also start to detangle some of those or address or bring in an expert to talk about, what some of the things that we need to be mindful of in terms of those collateral effects, because we may not care whether or not we police are sad that they're not out there policing, but we do deeply care about dismantling a middle class economic supports, good jobs that then have impacts throughout entire families. And so those are some things that we might want to think about. And so this is in response to why bring police in. I understand, I actually know Jody, and she, I think she's a fine person, but I just also think that it's, so having, her come in to have a, some very specific things might, I don't want that, but I think that, we'd be okay with it. But I think, let's not miss the bigger picture here around, what is it that we need to know, and what are the things that would make these recommendations not only bold, but also thoughtful around some of these other collateral impacts. And I think that's where I'm more interested in, not so much the actual institution of the police.
Thank you. Javier?
Thanks. So the big problem about having a specific questions and at the same time bringing the police commissioner, the police chief, is that the police chief is not going to be able to answer really a specific question that we would like to know. She can talk about the policy, but I personally would prefer to talk about more about what the numbers mean to somebody who has been working in that specific section. I feel that bringing the police chief would end up being a PR exercise of the police. That's literally what it is. And during this conversation, and I want to call the commission to pay attention to something that it has been pretty obvious across since we started, and even more obvious the last public hearing meeting. The people for whom the system has worked, people who has been able to profit out of the system, people who has been benefited out of the system and build a life out of this system, they are going to fight for it. They are going to fight to the nail for it. When I came here 12 years ago, without not knowing any English, I was stopped in a month and a half 6 times by the police. Mostly because, my color, but also because the car was under my wife's name. And a brown guy in a car with a female name, that looks bad. And even more in Western Mass when we're talking about this empty liberal exceptionalism going around. And I think the core of what we're seeing here as a dispute about having or not the police comes from that. From the vision of a word that has functioned for some and not work for others. And again, I have said this in so many ways, guys. Please, for those that here, you know who you are, you know if the system worked for you, stop for a second, think about for those who the system has not worked, and try to make a decision based on that and not in your own lived experience.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything to say? Or can we perhaps a motion to vote or something to move forward? Yes, Booker.
So it sounds like, one, I'm glad to hear we don't need, quote, permission if we choose to invite. I appreciate everything that's been said in this discussion. I still, as the chair of the Alternatives to Policing Commission, see value in inviting a member of the police force to discuss with us. And by the way, when you do a meeting with the people who are doing the service, you find out about all this secret stuff that's not written about. And quote, the most meaningful thing to me that happened when we had our guest speakers from one of the peer suicide support teams was when I said, by the way, if we had if 911 called you to come see somebody, what would you do? And they said, we don't want to be there. We don't want to do that. Well, that leaves us with my calling the police when a patient tells me they're suicidal. I'm looking for an alternative to that. And I would like to be able to, and actually what I'm finding out is the big thing is having 911 be able to triage a call to a different place than where we want it to be. I need verification from somebody in police to say that to me. By the way, I also hear some social workers don't feel safe going to certain places at certain times. To me, that could be racism. But they don't feel safe and they don't want to go and they want a police officer to go with them. We need to understand that. And that's information I need to be able to make a legitimate recommendation for, I don't want the police answering these calls. Can I get them out of the loop? But the police are the ones who can tell me when they get into the loop and when they don't get into the loop. I have a feeling David Hoos is right. I don't think they want to be in this loop. They'd love to get out of the loop. They don't want to be defunded to be out of the loop, but they want to be out of the loop. So I feel like I need that kind of specific information to help make a rather specific recommendation for an alternative. And if I don't have that information, if I read that report, I would say, well, I don't need to read the rest of this, especially if my bias is I don't really want to change anything. So if I've got the information, I think we do a better job of being able to make real change. So that's how I'm feeling about it. I'm glad I hope we don't need to do a vote about this. You know, and we can just leave it with, here's how we're all feeling and thinking about this.
Thank you. Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I think you brought up a really interesting point, and this gets to sort of what Namdi had brought up before as well, and it's something that I'm still really wrestling with, which is, you just said that we want to ask them if they're okay with not responding to mental health calls because we want validation from the police that our recommendation is good. I think that becomes, I mean, that's what Booker just said. So that's
not really what I meant, and that's not really what I said, but go ahead with what you're going to say.
I mean, I'm pretty sure you just said that you wanted validation from the police. You said you wanted to hear from them that they also didn't want to go on mental health calls, right? Which is validating our idea. At this point, I think it's pretty clear we're saying we want them out of that, right? Is that a correct assessment?
I think I'm curious about that. That's actually a question that I don't care about their answer to. What I actually care about is, how do they get pulled into the call? Why are they there to begin with? That's actually what I want to know.
Okay. So in that case, so how do they get pulled in? Is that something that a police officer is going to be able to just drop information to say, oh yeah, this is how we get added? I mean, this is like systemically, like, so this is the thing. This is getting back to, what question are we asking, and what do we need to answer that question? That's my concern. So like, if the question is, how do police, if our in the back of our mind, the question is, how do police get involved in these calls? Is an individual officer talking about an individual circumstance going to work? Is an individual officer going to be able to talk about larger systemic causes, like, well, no one responded before, or we responded once and it became we became the default because, you know, we're victims of our own success, or because different aspects of the city were defunded, or because that infrastructure never got funded to begin with. Like what answers the question of, why do the police respond to wellness checks?
So,
like, that's where I'm coming from.
May I say something back? So Nick Fleischer actually has been involved with, there already is a theoretical co-response to mental health calls in Northampton. Nick can say more about this than I can. By the way, there's theoretically a partnered response with Safe Horizons for domestic violence calls. Sometimes police are along, sometimes they're not. Sometimes mental health people are along, sometimes they're not. How does that decision occur? What happens? And you can go through all of the police reports and you can't figure that out. That's a question. This is getting into the detail, and this is not about, my bias is, I don't think the police should be involved. But there are times that they are deemed to need to be involved. How does that happen? And where does that come from? I mean, maybe Nick, I think it's useful to talk about, this is a rather specific set of questions. That's why I don't want to invite the police to come talk in a big public meeting. This is really specific. And to me, by the way, it's going to be a similar discussion about domestic violence calls. And what the readings I'm getting from Elisa Klein are, Safe Horizons is more comfortable with a co-police model. There are other agencies that are more comfortable with a non-police model, but we have to understand why, how did the police get there to begin with? But I'll stop there.
Thank you. Namdi.
Yeah, so I hope, Booker said a few minutes ago that, you know, he's glad that we don't need permission to invite police. But I'm worried that we may need to have a vote that we agree that we can invite police. I'm I won't make this motion if I can get some guidance that we don't need that, but I kind of would prefer, we had this long conversation, and I know I'd like to invite police in the future. And if anyone thinks that they are wanting to block that in the future, then maybe we need to have a vote to see where we stand as a commission about it, because I feel like this conversation, my understanding of this conversation is that we agree that on certain circumstances, we can do so. If anybody thinks that's not what we decided, then I think we should put it to a formal vote to see what we think. So I guess I want to just put that out there.
Thank you. Lois?
I just want to say, I mean, and partly in response to Booker, I mean, the question that you're asking, those questions about how the police got to do these things, I don't think the individual, whether it's Jody Casper or somebody representing the police, is going to be able to answer that. I mean, domestic violence, I can say more than 40 years ago, I was part of the movement to create shelters for battered women. And I can look at the whole trajectory of how this happened over a more than 40-year period. And, you know, we can talk about that, but I doubt that Jody Casper can talk about that trajectory, how that happened, you know, what the various interventions were, what the money was, what the on and on and on that led us to this point where someplace like Safe Passage works hand in hand with the police. And so, you know, I don't think the questions that you're posing are the questions that that Jody Casper or anybody from the Northampton Police Department is going to answer. Their historic, their money, their politics, their ideology, their all of these different things, defunding, big defunding, and then big funding. And so, I mean, it's a very complex set of answers that I don't think can happen in a question and answer with the Northampton Police.
Thank you. Alex?
Thanks everyone for all the different perspectives here. I would like us to have the freedom in our individual subcommittees to make the decision about whether we want to invite police or not. And so that's my request. And I don't think since we haven't made a vote that we can't, I think that we can at present. So I hope that we can, that's my request to not take a vote to do any sort of restriction, but let the subcommittees make that decision.
Thank you. Nick, did you put your hand down?
I was going to say something, but I pulled my hand down. Actually, I think Alex's suggestion is very interesting and kind of puts us in a slightly different direction. But I just have to say that I think that while there's concerns and serious concerns about the narrative and conflicting narratives and the power and authority differential, I do agree that it's the chief is the only person that I'm particularly interested in hearing from. And I do think, just for example, just to kind of follow up what Booker is saying, there's at least 1,000 calls for mental health response every year that the police do not do. We have a crisis response in Northampton that already diverts or picks up what goes to the police in other communities, and maybe not 100%, but I'm just saying these are things that I think it would help us to understand, to kind of figure out what we want to recommend for alternatives, so that we know what it's an alternative to. What is it we're trying to change? Yes, there's the police component, but there's other components as well. And I feel like it would be productive. That's, but I like the idea of the subcommittees. I'll stop there.
Thank you all for this discussion. I think that we are able to move on. Unless there are any last comments or thoughts. No. So it sounds like if subcommittees want to invite the chief or another representative from the police department, they're welcome to do that. And they will decide that. Awesome. I'm moving on. The next topic is a report back from the public hearing. I'm not 100% sure. Javier?
No, I just wanted to point out, it looks like somebody posted a link in relationship to the police interaction with mental health from the Daily Hampshire Gazette. Just pointed out if any in the commission see it.
Thank you. Dan, do you have more thoughts on what the report back from the public hearing was?
I think that was just to quickly touch base. I think most of the subcommittees or the folks in subcommittees did that, but to just quickly go back of what people got out of that, out of the public hearings, or if that's changed any directions for subcommittees. I mean, I think we've already talked about this before, but there were plenty of folks who had pretty strong calls for bold action and bold recommendations, with the idea that there would be compromise afterwards. I hadn't necessarily thought about the compromise afterwards being something that would direct, so like reach even further than I would normally, just to make a recommendation that would eventually get cut back to what I wanted. I hadn't really thought about that negotiation, so that's something that I'm thinking about a little bit more presently, maybe than I had in the past. I think for myself, a lot of what came out, even when people said they were pro-police, and this is something I'm still working at, is to sort of disentangle what it means to be, what we say when we, or what we mean when we say police responses to different things. And what we mean when we say the police in and of themselves. That's something that I'm still disentangling in my mind, walking away from that meeting. I don't know if anybody else has thoughts.
Elizabeth?
Thank you, Dan. I think we talked a little bit about this in our subcommittee as well. When we were talking about the different services that we were going to look into and that the police do, some of the things we might look into and possible alternatives. One of the things that I brought up was, rape and sexual assault as one of the things that we would want to look into and not have a police response. And it occurred to me during that committee meeting, but also it occurred to me also during the public comment when people are talking about why they want the police or don't want to defund it and why do we need police, that we're talking that where on the spectrum of policing are they thinking about that positive response? Are we talking about making sure that murders or rapists or whoever are removed from hurting people, like that end point? Or are they talking about, which is where my concern is that initial response, that initial, you know, do you need police officers in, you know, carrying weapons and in a police car and all of that, responding to somebody's home, you know, because they're reporting a rape or a sexual assault? You know, do you need, is that what's needed in that particular instance? You know, or do you need when someone's coming into the police station to report something like that, just, you know, just any random police officer who happens to be there taking that intake? Is that the kind of, you know, is that a service that we actually need police to do? Or are there alternatives to that whole response that may end up resulting in someone who's committed a crime to, you know, be answerable to that crime? You know, that's what people are thinking of. They're thinking we need police because we need that at the end of the day. But what we're talking about might be different in terms of that, all the steps that lead up to that, and in what phase and in what moment is it important to have an armed police response. And I think that is something we should be naming explicitly in these conversations, because I think we've conflated it all together. Again, part of that narrative we're swimming in, we all think that's good police, you know, or police are good for all of that. But when you start to pull the individual pieces apart, you know, you realize again why some of the deep community harm and oppression that happens and silencing that happens when you start to pull the segments apart. And knowing that at the end of the day, you know, we all, you know, everyone in the community wants to be saved. Everyone in the community wants to, if they've been harmed in some way, to have those people of those harms be answerable in some way. But it's all those steps in between that's the focus of this committee. And I think it's important to name, you know, again, what it is we're talking about when we say police response, what it is we're talking about when we say police services. And also, as we're listening to public response or public comment, if there's an opportunity to ask questions, to start to disentangle, like, well, you know, I know you say this is great, you know, police are great or what have you, but what exactly are you commenting about? You know, what's the outcome that you actually are really are you thinking about? So just for our being able to address it.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? Carol?
In listening to the voices in the public hearing, I was struck by the extent to which there was very informed consent, very informed information about the role of policing with unhoused people. And I felt that it was very compelling. You know, I was kind of horrified by some of the testimony I heard. And so, you know, it resonated with me about, you know, human rights concerns in the downtown, especially during this period of COVID, you know, no water, no, you know, public bathrooms, et cetera. So I'm just wondering, I'll put this out as a question, whether any subcommittee is currently focusing in on that aspect, policing of people who are in encampments, who are unhoused. I mean, is that an area that's being examined?
Lois?
I don't know exactly what people are doing about that, but one of the things that we said in our report was that this money that was out of this year's budget is still not being used for these very things that they could be used for. Like, you know, drinking water and places to have a toilet, you know, these really basic human rights. And there's $700,000 sitting there that I think people thought when the money was voted to be taken away from the police that it was going to be used. And it was going to be used for these I mean, they weren't specified at that point because, you know, we were in a pandemic and, you know, things were different enough then. But the fact that there's no demand, you know, coming from this committee and coming from the city council and other people that saying, you know, this is the time to be using that money. And whether it's the role of this commission as a recommendation or the role of this commission and the council and the residents, you know, whoever that combination is. I mean, I don't really see, you know, it's happening because people testified about it at the hearing because that was the forum where people could say something about it. But other than that, I don't think there really has been a forum for people to say something about it. And so I don't know, you know, what we or other people can do to, you know, compel the mayor to start spending this money now, right now. I don't think that's a subcommittee function. I think it's a function of the city to be doing it, and there's money to be doing it.
Thank you, Lois. Alex?
I could speak to that a little bit. Actually, 300,000 of that money was used, and it was used to make up for the lack of parking revenue. And during that city council decision, I spoke about how the mayor has a couple reports already that one was on panhandling and one was about housing, and that detail action steps that he could be taking. And he said, I take your point, but I got the impression he still wasn't going to take action on those in terms of extra expenses, which was very frustrating. So just to give you all an update of where that's at, and that you know, we on the city council, or I can't speak for everyone else, but I would love to see funding happen there. And in our, maybe we're getting away. This is in the next item that we'll be talking about the preliminary report, but you know, we can have some kind of recommendations there as well.
Thank you, Alex. Lois?
I just have a follow. Now, what do you mean 300,000 was taken from that 700,000 and put to supplement money that wasn't coming in from parking revenue? To supplement it what? To supplement the people that are, I don't understand what it was, what it supplemented.
So the income, because of the lack of parking revenue, because of so our revenue was $300,000 down, and the Fiscal Stabilization Fund, which is where the money that the would have been taken from that fund to fund the police budget, or you know, to fund our budget in general, but was not taken because of our cut, or less was taken. So we took 300,000 simply to make up for the lost revenue. So in a sense, you can say it was, you know, that much has been taken versus how much was sent, or was not taken because of our cut. So if that clarifies.
Yeah. So there, yeah, it does. So I mean, I don't know if that's what people thought. All the people that testified, the hundreds of people that testified during the hearings to defund the police, thought that $300,000 was going to be used, taken and used in that way. But obviously that is what happened. But that means that approximately $400,000 remains and could be spent now. Is that right?
It's a little confusing because we made a couple different cuts, and there was a time where the mayor we were about to make a cut, and then the mayor revised his budget, removing. So the exact amount. I'm not sure I have, but but there's also free cash, which we just certified is now at 5.7 million. So and of course we want to save some of that because we have no idea of the economic situation coming ahead. But there is money to take action here, and I think that is something that we can put in our recommendations.
That was something in our statement that the budget spending committee, we did say that we wanted to see that money spent in that way now.
Thank y'all. If no one else has, Nick.
I just want to say that the public hearing, I think, had a very real and substantive impact on the Policies and Services Committee. And it's going to be hard for me to explain it without taking a lot of time because we spent a whole meeting on it. But we really shifted from looking at policies, which we've started to look at and we've made some inquiries about, but we really shifted to looking at services and what services and what's the range of services and what services will be needed. And it's really made us look more specifically at services, the very specific services. But it really shifted our the direction and our focus. And I think it was meaningful. And I found the public hearing I think we all found the public hearing very helpful.
Thank you. Any other thoughts or comments before I move on? Okay, the next item on the agenda is a discussion of the preliminary report. So we have that coming up, I believe. What is the date? Is it next week, Friday? I don't know why I'm looking at my phone as if my phone is going to be able to tell me that. So that is happening. I guess updates around where subcommittees might be with that and how we might move forward to make sure that that is completed. So there was a suggestion, I think, or an ask if this was something that we might be able to request an extension on. I guess as a topic of something.
I'm concerned. I don't really understood Booker's reaction. Is that a yes? Was
He seemed extremely excited about that idea. I don't know. But like that doesn't feel like a decision that myself or Dan can make, but definitely like even the request or the ask for that. And so I would definitely like to have a conversation with my colleagues about that. Javier and then Namdi.
Yeah, I sent an email to Dana and Dan sort of asking about this. Mostly, I mean, I know the reality of the commission. I don't know the reality of the other subcommittees. I know the reality of our subcommittee. And based on that, I'm gonna presume that Booker agrees with like how beneficial would be an extension, having in mind that our subcommittee is starting tomorrow to the working sessions on it. So we would actually benefit of a couple of weeks of extension to be able to actually have a draft, mostly because I don't I mean I can be completely wrong on this, but I don't see a unified understanding of how things should change or not, or where the direction should be. So having a draft that it's not gonna be a draft, it's gonna at the end of the day it's gonna be like 1,000 different voices with different opinions. Uh, I don't see it as a draft, and I think that we benefit of an extension on this.
I guess I will add or echo that extension would be welcome. My role as professor at the end of a semester, I'm granting a lot of extensions to my students now, and would appreciate whoever is empowered to do that for us would be great. But I think that would in some ways be kicking the can down the road, and it would be good to use our time now to hear a little bit about the process that maybe previous commissions have used to arrive at these interim reports, so we can so I can at least kind of a better sense of what work is ahead of us, like what strategies have worked well in the past, like how do these things come about, or how have they come about in the past, would be useful to me. But just quickly reporting in for our subcommittee, we did, the reality of that deadline did dawn upon us in our last meeting, and we, because our group is focused on policies and services, we said just to get started with some text, we would all assigned ourselves like a little piece of the pie, and then we said we would focus on the Northampton Police website and begin to kind of write a little draft piece covering our little section that we were going to then bring to our subcommittee. So we started a process, but that process, is a long way away from integrating it to some kind of coherent whole that would represent, the 15 people on the commission. So I guess what I'm asking for is first echoing what we need to do to get an extension, but secondly, can anyone who has more experience on this kind of process share how an interim report comes together in a commission, kind of what process has been effective to yield such a report, so we can get a sense of what's involved and how long it has taken in the past. That's
Anyone have experience? Alex.
I don't have experience, but I would suggest that since the mayor and the city council president created the commission, that they would be the ones to grant an extension. And then I would also say for me, where I'm at, I'm thinking of this more as a progress report rather than a preliminary report, something where I could put, a lot of the information that I've gleaned and gotten from so many different people and research, and but without actual, I don't feel ready to make recommendations other than, some possible ones. So, and we can do that if that's, if that's where we're at. But so, yeah, that's my thought.
Lois?
Well, maybe this is convenient thinking, but people could correct me. But in my mind, I thought these were that each of the subcommittees were going to make a preliminary report, and that there was no. I didn't have the idea that that between all of these different subcommittee reports that they were going to be melded together into one report, and we would have consensus of that preliminary report. So, I mean, that's a whole other task. What we decided to do in the spending committee is to try to write, build on what we reported the last time and each add some more material, and then meet again this coming Friday and to try to have a meeting of presenting that information so that we could all know it at the same time. But there was no discussion, at least that I remember, that after we finished with our piece, that we were going to have to meld these three pieces together into some kind of agreement and whole.
Thank you. I don't recall that either. I don't know if that is something that we need to do at this point, maybe for the final, but not for this preliminary report. Javier and then Dan.
So taking a look to the website, it says that we have the preliminary and final reporting deadlines, right? How I'm reading this is that whatever a preliminary report is sort of the overview where you're heading, right? I mean, it's not just miscellaneous information. So for those who mentioned that they want to talk to the police because they're gonna do a thorough analysis, we also need to, if we're talking about a preliminary report that should sort of in certain way or another, not be just a miscellaneous account of what we have done, but the direction that we're starting to take. And that has to be conducive and reflected in the final report. I that's how I read it. I may be wrong, but that's how I read it if I take a look to the language in the website.
Thank you.
So I think I read this a little differently, and I read it much more like a progress report of what we've done so far, what we know so far, and listing the avenues that we're exploring. Like, I mean, I'm fine with either asking for an extension. I don't mind that, to give us more time to gather our thoughts, but I'm also okay with saying, like, we've spent, you know, over a dozen meetings at this point, in various groups, plus all of the work that we've done individually, you know, reaching out to people, finding information, looking at information, going over and poring over the data that's been given back to us. I feel okay saying we've got a lot, we've got a lot of balls in the air that we're juggling. And I think that's like, for myself, I think that's okay. If we say, this is what the subcommittees have found so far, this is what we've been looking at, and to identify tensions within the commission as well, to say that we don't, because we don't at this point have an end goal, right, that we've all agreed on. We don't have a shared vision of what the project, you know, if we're going at this in the spirit of just the description, right, we were assembled to make changes or recommend changes. We don't know what we want to see 10 years from now or 20 years from now, you know, collectively. And I think that it's okay to identify that, to say that we are still looking at understanding what community values are as they relate to this one specific area, where we can speak. And, you know, maybe we even identify the fact that, you know, by the time we finish a report, community values might change at least a little bit, but in a few years, they might change drastically as the population shifts. So really, I'm okay with identifying tensions and at least for myself, you know, saying, we don't know where we'll end up yet. We're at this moment, you know, just digging to see where the tunnel is, not even the light at the end of it yet.
Thank you. Nick?
I agree with you, Dan. I like, I think it's, I don't think we can do much more than that, but I think that makes sense to me, and I like it. I want to put out an idea that we still have another half hour or so, and I'm not waiting to the very end. But if we do get an extension, I'm wondering if there is something in this report that we could all agree on and put into the report. And something that has stood out as a consistent message, which is not my area of expertise, but the need for houseless individuals to have water and a restroom keeps coming up. And I'm wondering, and there's some revenue, it's not revenue, there's some aspect of the budget left over from that 10% cut. I'm just wondering if this is something we might include in our report as an immediate recommendation. And I just want to put out, Lois actually is the person who suggested this, and I'm just picking up on that, and I think it's an interesting idea. It's not the main substance of the report, but it might be something that would give some seriousness to what we're trying to do.
Thank you. Namdi?
Thank you for that comment, Nick. And I also agree with how Dan has framed a vision for a final report that reflects the actual tensions and tries to kind of serve as a summary of what we've actually done to date. On that front, I think that would be great. I was trying to imagine what the process might be, and I can imagine each of us in our subcommittees taking responsibility to kind of write a section and then kind of feed that section maybe to the co-chairs of the entire committee, who would just write some kind of narrative introduction and closure, but would kind of just basically kind of weave together the whole thing. I was just thinking that might be a good way to go forward. As for Nick's final suggestion that we kind of try as a commission to vote or to express with some consensus a concern about the houseless issue, I'm not totally opposed to that. I mean, I certainly absolutely agree it's an urgent issue with winter coming and everything else. Is a sense of urgency to the issue. I must say though that I see the issue as not obviously squarely in the center of our charge. So though it has been brought to us repeatedly, and I think I'm impressed by it as much as Nick is impressed by it. I wonder about the interim report. I guess I want to think about how do we justify the focus on that, especially if we have much less consensus on, say, policing reforms or things that to me sound more central to the charge. How do we say, well, we can't agree on anything, but the one thing we can agree on is we need more bathrooms and water fountains downtown. I wonder if that will be read as really kind of the central, did we use our time wisely? If that's the one thing we can agree on at this point in the process. So it's just a question. I totally agree that having a place to go to the bathroom and drink water is a human rights urgent concern, and somebody should be concerned with it and taking it up. And I don't know if it's us, but somebody should be. I guess I'll stop there.
Thank you. Josie?
When it comes to squaring this particular community in terms of the policing and our charge, I think it's important to look at who the police are meant to serve, and the unhoused population in Northampton is definitely part of the people that the police should serve. On top of that, we're looking at the reallocation of funds away from the police and towards social programs and peer-led programs and other things that would benefit the community, right? And so when we look at the housing population as a population within the city of Northampton that is over-policed, and suffered a lot of fundamental negatives from the existence of that over-policing, and we're talking about pulling funds away from Northampton, it makes sense to me to reallocate those funds to not only the most pertinent and important kind of social resources that could help uplift those people, but also the very creation of, say, public water or public a public restroom immediately gives those people a place where they no longer need to be policed for particular actions that occurred because of the lack of existence of that thing. For example, if we put up a public bathroom, now the police are no longer getting calls about public urination, for example. So I think it's directly correlated to something like that. And I think that a lot of us would agree that access to clean water is a human right that is fundamentally not given to the people, specifically the unhoused people in Northampton. And I think within that context, both on the maladies that the police have done to the unhoused population, and in terms of kind of taking away some burden away from police by providing those social services such as a clean bathroom and clean water, we then take a little bit off of their load. And so in those multiple ways, I think that is exactly within our charge.
Thank you, Lois.
I agree with Josie completely. I mean, these behaviors that people are doing because they are unhoused are criminalized. And people are being arrested for doing these things because they have no choice. And so I think it relates completely to what our mandate is. And hopefully some of this money could be used not only for bathrooms and the water fountain, but to subsidize some other way for people to be housed so that people are not, you know, in tents in the middle of the winter and then are being arrested for being on private property. And so not only is it taking police time, it's criminalizing people. So I see this, you know, as completely part of what we should be recommending. Not tangential at all.
Thank you, Booker. You're muted.
I will never be able to say it as nicely as I just said, so we'll lose that. I agree with this idea that we should ask that money be reallocated to a homelessness issue. Pamela Schwartz, who met with the Alternatives to Policing Committee meeting, talked a lot about what's happening in terms of trying to improve access to housing. And I think the problem with what happened with the way the budget was done quickly by the city council is they took out the money, but they didn't say where the money was to be spent. And like now it's being fungible money that could go anywhere. And I think, and so I'm going to have a question here for the two city councilors who are sitting here. If we put in our report, we would like this money to be immediately allocated towards this circumstance, do we have to say, because what we also heard from, I know that there are now certain new contracts being made with ServiceNet and improving housing, what's going to go on at First Churches. There's issues about should they do more commodes, opening up shelter beds, or do they fund the other first housing ideas, which are actually about giving people permanent housing rather than immediate housing? Or do you want to just, I'm sorry for saying just, or do you want to focus on this immediate issue? And do we, and here's the question for Alex and Michael is, do we need to say, we want you to spend the money here? Not, because if you say towards this circumstance, that money could go in a lot of different directions. And that's my question.
Thank you, Booker. Alex?
Yeah, so just to clarify, the council had no power to reallocate. It could only cut. And but I think that most of us as councilors made recommendations to the mayor, and that was then his choice. We approve, if he then made a recommendation, we would have to approve it. So that's the way the balance of power works there. I definitely think, you know, it's clear, I think we have consensus that this is one of the issues that we want to see funded. But in terms of, you know, if we can, for our report, come up with broad recommendations that we have consensus on. So some things like, you know, as a society, we have tasked the police with many things they are not well equipped to handle, and the funding of alternatives, including peer-led programs. I can see us writing something that we could put out, but I want to lay out the necessary timeline if we're going to do this by the 17th, which means, you know, we have to have our subcommittee meetings, we have to do our work of writing, we have to then approve that, and then we have to come back to the main committee to approve something. If that's not ready, the main commission, we have to have another commission meeting. So I don't think we really have the time or perhaps just the will to have that many meetings to approve our preliminary report. And so for that, arguing for something of a extension seems wise.
Thank you. Nick and then Michael.
I'm assuming we're going to need the extension. I was just thinking that when I made the proposal, but just in response to what you're saying, Booker, what we're doing by putting this in our report is we're focusing on the issue. The mayor, it's a recommendation. The mayor will spend it however he makes these decisions. We don't know how many balls are in the air. We don't know all the things. But by this commission making a recommendation that focuses on the houseless population, I think it emphasizes the seriousness of that issue in relation to policing in Northampton. And the others have stated the relevance of it better than me. But I think it's more of it's a highlighting of the issue. The actual outcome is definitely it's just all we are empowered to do is make a recommendation, as Elizabeth has noted several times.
Thank you, Michael.
Well, I do think, Booker, you've said this in previous meetings when we've talked about recommendations, that our recommendations should be rather specific. I think to say, basically what we're hearing is we want to do something about this specifically for the winter that's approaching. To have options for people to use public restrooms safely, to have people be able to warm up. We've talked about warming centers, and quite honestly, the mayor realizes that this is a necessity in Northampton. I think because he's working on this resiliency hub, and he's devoting money to that. But there's a more immediate use than what his plan is for that right now. The plan for that is still kind of far out, I think. So I think looking at a building that's not being used, right, because we know that most of the city buildings are closed. Where are there a concentration of restrooms? Is it the senior center? Could the senior center be opened? Could our central services department staff that with a janitorial staff that could be, suited up in personal protective equipment and clean the building so that it's safe for people to use? We'd have to suggest, of course, that all COVID-19 protocols and guidelines are followed. But I do think a recommendation could be written here. And I do think it has to be specific because I think, we're really just, again, encouraging the mayor to figure out how he wants to spend the money if we don't give him something specific. And again, to Alex's point, I think it's important to note that. I mean, Alex specifically very strongly, has gone to the mayor a couple of times in our council meetings asking him, to not forget that this money is set aside for the use of these causes that we're discussing here tonight, and the mayor hasn't budged on them yet. So I think he's waiting for some very specific recommendations, and I think that's where we have to intend to go. And in order to write that, if we need to ask for an extension, I would just point out that the city council meeting, the next meeting is the 17th of December. We're supposed to be presenting there. That's next week, Thursday. The following meeting after that is 3 weeks later. Because of how the Thursdays fall in December, there's not a meeting until January 7th. If we ask for a 3-week extension to try to come up with our preliminary report and that recommendation, we're going to be into the very cold season. So I would say if we're going to, there's no need in making this recommendation in March. If we want to make this recommendation, we need to get on it. And I think if we're going to ask for an extension, it's got to be just that 3 weeks. And then this commission has got to get this report done specifically around that recommendation. And to me, what Dan said before, if we can give a progress report, if we can discuss the tensions that we're having and the obstacles that we see as a group in terms of coming to consensus, But then as Namdi mentioned, we could talk about those tensions and then say one thing that we do agree on is this. And I do think, Namdi, your point, wasn't necessarily outside of what I was thinking in terms of it being part of what we're charged with. But I do think that Josie's point about, not having people be policed because they're urinating outside or whatever the case may be, is part of what we're after here. So I do think as a group, we should, if we need the extension, we should ask for it. And if we get that extension, I mean, ironically, if we go to the city council on the 17th, that's the day the report's due. So we're not getting an extension in advance of when it's due. So, I guess if we go to them on the 17th, what we're saying is we haven't done this yet. Please wait 3 more weeks.
Thank you, Michael. Namdi?
So thank you. I've benefited from hearing different perspectives on this and find myself shifting a little bit in terms of seeing this issue as maybe more central. Maybe in addition to the points made by other counselors, I'm also reminded that if I take into account all of the information coming in from the public, when I think about the public comment, if I were trying to write a report on what we've been doing all this time, aside from whatever the charge might have looked like to me on paper coming in, there's been a real volume of input from the community, from this particular community, speaking to their issues. And so I guess what I'm saying is I can imagine an interim report that basically documents that says that, that one important sort of fire hose of information coming at us has been this particular constituency that I hadn't expected I was going to hear so much from, but we have heard so much from. And that, and if we did something like that, we might decide that our interim progress report is in a sense only about that. So especially because if we're going to take this seriously, it strikes me then time is of an issue, and getting money and things going sooner rather than later is important. So I would then favor not getting an extension on the progress report, but that we envision a progress report that's only about the house list issue and says that, other things are coming, but for now we wanted to highlight this issue and wanted to put this in front of you to look at because it's urgent. And maybe something like that could be put together again, maybe just by the co-chairs of something really brief that doesn't speak to the other work we're doing. I don't know what people think about that, but it's a way to take an extension on some of the other stuff without and get this thing working sooner rather than later.
Alex?
Namdi, yeah, I hear your point there, and I'm trying to think of a way forward now, specifically around like we can make a communication to the mayor and the council that doesn't act separate from our report. We can do that at any time, and also I do believe that we don't need the council's permission to delay, but rather the mayor and the city council president, as they're the ones who established us. So that's my argument there. So I'm not going to almost ready to craft a motion, which would be to request an extension to the January 7th city council meeting, which gives us 2 full commission meetings, one on December 22nd and one on the 5th. So by the 22nd, we would our subcommittees could deliver a draft, and then we would discuss that on the 22nd, give comment, and then have another opportunity for us to take a vote on a final report on the 5th, and then that could be delivered on the 7th. I think that gives us enough time to do this instead of trying to rush it by scheduling an additional meeting or 2 before the 17th. And there's also the question of whether we would try to craft an additional communication about this particularly urgent issue. So I'd hear comment on that, and then I'd be happy to make a motion if there seems like there's agreement.
One second. So Dan and then Nick.
I think I would be in favor of asking for a short extension and then I think we can do both. I think we can have as part of so I sort of see this as an introduction, this report, just an introduction, a breakdown of what the subcommittees are working on currently, and then a sort of, and also have that be the avenues that they're exploring. And within the introduction, we weave in information about, the sort of the comments that we've gotten, the emails, the research, the speakers, and all of those sort of things as identified. These new avenues of information are shaping where we're heading as well, right? We are in fact, building the plane as we are flying it at this moment. But I think the other part of this is that we can identify short-term and immediate needs. And I think we can identify those needs based on the comments that we've gotten and the things that we've learned ourselves. Identify those immediate needs and identify suggestions. I think this commission and the funds that were cut initially from the police department are sort of interrelated, right? The commission didn't make the decision to cut funding, but the commission and that cut came about from the same very powerful sort of emotions that like, I don't want to say erupted, but that came out for police reform over the summer, or police abolition over the summer. And so I think, not that it's our money to play with as a commission, but to really make a claim that, like, right, both the commission and the cuts were made in the spirit of community reinvestment, and we can speak to that. And I think having that be part of the preliminary report, and it could be 3 things on there, it could be 1 thing on there, it could be just bathrooms, or we could talk about bathrooms and sanitation, and maybe we talk about different housing situations or shelters, like all of those things. We can bring that in as an immediate identified need, and I think that's doable in the time frame that we have.
Thank you. Nick?
I'm just trying to clarify where we're at. What I'm hearing is that we're going to ask for an extension, but at the same time we ask for an extension, we're going to make a recommendation, and that we this is part of our it's kind of like the first installment, and then our report will be given 2 or 3 weeks later, based on whether we get the extension. And I would be comfortable with some of you who have more knowledge and expertise in this area to put together the wording of the recommendation with the co-chairs. That's what I'm hearing. I just want to see if we're on the same page.
I feel like I don't know. I've heard the immediate need, and how do we address that, as well as requesting an extension for January 7th. But I'm not sure. Lois? You made it.
Yep. Just going back to what Alex said, if we can do both, I mean, I would prefer that the recommendation that we make about these services, these things that need to happen now. I mean, it's not like winter is upon us. I mean, we're in winter. I mean, maybe not officially, but it was 20-something degrees last night. And so I would, support Alex's recommendation, which is this extension with these dates, but then to have a recommendation or whatever the official language is soon, and not to wait, to have it by the 17th at the city council meeting, and so that at least our opinion is out there, whether it's, whether anything happens as a result, whether it moves mayor one way or the other, but at least say, this is what we've been working on, this is what we think is important. The time is now, this money should be starting to be used for these things, a warming center or this, these various things that we've noted, because we feel that, or we believe that this is a way that people who are unhoused are criminalized. So I would go with what Alex was recommending.
Thank you. Dan?
Yeah, so I just wanted to respond because Nick asked, what we were thinking, and Alex, I'll let you sort of fill in, but what I understood and where I am thinking is that that first off, we can craft a letter that goes out anytime with our recommendation for these immediate responses, right? That doesn't necessarily have to be part of the reply. So we could do that, working either with the co-chairs of subcommittees or with anyone who's interested in having a draft ready, produce that draft and then submit it to everyone. Then we can comment on it, work on it at our next full committee meeting. And so we can do that at any point. The report part is where we would say, at least this is my understanding, is that we would say we will not have the best, we're not in the shape that we would like to be in for the 17th to make a strong report. In order to get all of this into workable sense, and to borrow someone else's language, that it's not all just miscellaneous comments and streams of consciousness that we hopefully smash together, that we need until January 7th. So we wouldn't be presenting anything on the 17th of December. So that's what I understand.
Thank you, Dan. Booker?
So I'm about to offer two separate motions. Motion one is that we move our report and ask that it be submitted for January 7th to the City Council and the Council Chair. That's motion number one. Later, we have to discuss that if we're going to play Robert's rules. The second motion would be that we offer a recommendation for immediate use of the funding that was taken out of the budget for the police commission, with specific goals that we need to discuss further before we can submit the letter. So two separate resolutions so that we can keep those two issues apart. So I'll ask for a second for the first motion I made.
Second.
So now we vote.
A discussion.
We are voting to discuss it.
No, usually you would ask for discussion, and then when people have spoken,
We've just been discussing though for a really long time.
Is there any further discussion?
Any further discussion? Nope. So can we vote now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Noah, do you mind?
Yes. We scroll back up here. Lois?
Yeah.
Can you say that one more time?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Elizabeth?
Yes.
Yes. Booker?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
Nick?
Yes.
Yes, okay. David?
Yes.
Alex?
Yes.
Javier?
Yes.
Dana?
Yes.
Namdi?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
Josie?
Yes.
Cynthia?
Yes.
And Carol?
Yes.
That's
Thank-
it.
Yay. Nick?
I just want to say that, you know, December 17th is really soon. If our request is not accepted for some reason, we need to write reports really quickly. And I just want to say that's the way I understand it, that's the other side of this. And I think, you know, I think that's okay. I think we just say where we're at and what we're working on, and that's what they're looking for.
Thank you, Nick. Javier?
Yeah, I would just say that I would assume that we're sort of working in good faith in the same way how we're asking. I don't see why they would reject something like that in good faith.
Yeah. David?
I would like to second Booker's second motion.
Do you mind repeating that?
I would be glad to read it again. I move that we offer a recommendation for immediate use of the funding that was removed from the police budget with specific goals to be determined. That's the end.
Do you mind seconding it again?
I
David?
second.
As part of discussion, and Michael hasn't asked me to do this yet, but the Human Rights Commission is meeting next Wednesday, the 16th. And I am a member of this commission because I was voted on as a member of the Human Rights Commission to represent human rights. I would ask the Human Rights Commission to also join us in recommending this proposal.
Thank you. Alex?
And so just to clarify, we would be coming up with these proposals, perhaps talking about it in our subcommittees, and then on our meeting on the 22nd is when we would vote on the proposal and then send it. Is that the idea?
That's what I would like.
Great.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Maybe now vote. No one may mind.
Lois?
Yes.
Elizabeth?
Yes.
Booker?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
Nick?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Alex?
Yes.
Javier?
Yes.
Dana?
Yes.
Namdi?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
Josie?
Yes.
Cynthia?
Yes.
And Carol?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, y'all. So the next item on the agenda is discussion of anonymity during comments and submitting statements. This feels like a much larger conversation than the 3 minutes that we have left allows. I move this to our next meeting.
I second that proposal.
Thank you. Do we need to vote on that? Oh, Javier, yes.
I don't have an answer for that. I was going to make a comment. Yeah, I would like to table this because this is going to be even more relevant when Dana and Dan go a little deeper with the city solicitor and about the creation of a of a working group to be able to do the outreach. I think that's relevant. It's going to be highly relevant with that group if that group start working. So I don't see a problem with tabling this until also we have an answer about the other thing.
Yeah. Do we need to vote on that?
Can I just say something before we leave the discussion part of this? Just as an introduction to why we even brought this up, so that people have it on their minds. We'd reached out to the city council president and heard back that essentially we do not have a requirement to identify people who make comments, so we can accept anonymous comments in a myriad of different ways. But we're also balancing that as anonymous comments. There's no accountability, and it may make it seem or may be problematic depending on what those comments are and how we weigh them and how we understand them and how we put them into what we're doing. So one of the things that we can do as a body is decide how we would handle anonymous comments or protecting the identities of people who want to speak but fear retaliation or fear discrimination or whatever it is. So that's something that we'll need to sort of figure out collectively. So to at least be thinking about that while it's tabled, and just so that when we come back to this, we'll all have, hopefully a lot of really great ideas and some solutions that we can throw out.
Thank you, Dan. Alex, is your hand up again, or did I just neglect to ignore it?
No, it was up again just to answer the question about whether we need to vote, which I would say is no, because as chair, you can just put something on the next agenda.
That is right. Thank you for that reminder. Well, as co-chair, I'm tabling it. And we have review of minutes from our last meeting that I would like a motion. I motion to approve.
Second.
Thank you. Noah, do you mind reading? I mean, not reading, but.
Yes. Oh, just taking my last note. Okay.
Yeah.
Lois.
Yes.
Elizabeth.
Yes.
Booker.
Yes.
Dan.
Yes.
Nick.
Yes.
David.
Yes.
Alex.
Yes.
Javier.
Yes.
Dana.
Yes.
Namdi.
Yes.
Yes.
Michael. Josie.
Yes.
Cynthia.
Yes.
Carol.
Yes.
Hallelujah.
With the addition that I was there.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, you were there.
Okay.
You all.
Thank you. So for our next meeting, I have report back on an outreach working group as well as the anonymity conversation. Is there anything else that anyone would like to add to next agenda?
I think we'll need.
I'm sorry.
Alex first.
Oh, Dan might be saying the same thing, but the working on the report.
That's important. Anything else that comes to mind? I would like to move to adjourn.
Seconded.
Noah, just one more time. Please and thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Oh,
Nick
wait.
wants to talk.
Nick has something to say.
Oh, great. Love that.
Do we want to have committee updates on the agenda?
Yeah. Oh, maybe. Does anyone else? I'm putting it on there. If you have an update, you have an update. Thank you. Take it away, Noah.
All right. So we've got Lois.
Yes.
Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Booker.
Yes.
Dan.
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Alex,
Yes.
Javier,
Yep.
Dana,
Yes.
Namdi,
Yes.
Michael,
Yes.
Josie,
Yes.
Cynthia, and Carol.
Yes.
Motion to adjourn is approved.
Amazing. Good night.
Good night,
Good night,
everyone.
everyone.
Good night. Thank you.